Alright, yeah, and welcome back on into some more Magic Arena. So, this week we're going to be taking a look at a Bant lands list. So, this one is special, and it's special because it's for best of 3, and it is 90% rotation proof. So, the only thing that we're actually losing in this particular deck, I believe, is just the Botanical Sanctum, as far as the main board is concerned anyway. Botanical Sanctum is the only one we're losing. Actually, we're losing Evolving Wilds, aren't we? Or are we? Or am I just picking the wrong bad... No, we're not losing Evolving Wilds. We're just losing the art for it. So, I like this art. But everything else in the main board, at the very least, is not actually going to rotate. That does mean that there are a few Kaladesh and Aether Revolt cards that you could put into this deck in order to make it not rotation-proof, but a little bit better. But that's not my plan. I mean, rotation's coming in 5 weeks' time, so if I'm going to show you guys a really expensive to build deck, it may as well stick around. The only exception to the rule is that Nissa is also going out as well. She is kind of useful, but she's not entirely the glue to the deck, so you could replace it with a lot of things, to be honest. Let's walk through, shall we? She is a green, a blue, and an X for a 0 loyalty planeswalker. The 0 is equal to the X cost you pay, so the longer the game goes on, essentially, the more powerful Nissa becomes as far as her loyalty is concerned. +2 allows her to scry 2, which allows us to either set up the top of our deck so that we can draw the cards with Teferi or Tatyova triggers, or we can just bottom the cards that we don't want to see in that particular matchup and move right along. The 0 can be something to allow us to ramp. Look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card or a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of loyalty counters on Nissa, you may put that card onto the battlefield. So we can ramp in many different ways. We can Nissa 0 to hit a land, or we can Nissa 0 to hit a mana dork, or a way of playing more lands for the turn in the case of Wayward Swordtooth, or even benefiting from land triggers with Tatyova. The whole point is to play loads of lands as many times as possible in as long a turn as you can make, and if you can make a very long turn with Karn's Temporal Sundering, then you're in business. Karn's Temporal Sundering, a little better than Nexus of Fate in this particular deck because we're not planning on taking infinite turns. It's 1 mana cheaper, and it also has a bounce effect available for us. So as soon as turn 6 straight after Tatyova comes down, we can just Karn's Temporal Sundering, take extra turns, bounce creatures out of the way, which allows Tatyova and Mana Dork beats to get in. Wayward Swordtooth also a big one for that. And even like Nissa lands for her -6. Her -6 ultimate is one thing that you could do immediately as well. -6 allows you to untap 2 target lands you control, and they become 5/5 elemental creature tokens with flying and haste until the end of the turn, and they're still lands, so we can still use them to tap for the turn. I do believe in one particular game I do use Nissa's ultimate not for the 10 damage that is almost guaranteed with it, so that's a fun little interaction. So to get to all of our 5 mana creatures and planeswalkers and things like that, we do have plenty of mana dorks. We're running 4 copies of Llanowar Elves, so for 1 green, a 1/1 that adds 1 green mana to your mana pool. Nice turn 1 play. You might have seen this a lot against Green Stompy. This allows them to get down turn 2 Steel Leaf Champion, which is usually just game ending almost immediately. So Llanowar Elves allows us to do a similar kind of thing because we can get Wayward Swordtooth down on 3, which allows us to make extra land drops. So while we're not going on beatdown, we're trying to play lands anyway, so Swordtooth is going to enable us to do that. We also have Drover of the Mighty, 4 copies of this, 2 mana 1/1, but this is a 5 colour mana dork, so it allows us to use the blue and white for other Teferis, things like that. Makes sure that Teferi can come down with like 3 mana on board and things like that. And we also get a nice little benefit on a fringe case, +2/+2 as long as you control a dinosaur. Wayward Swordtooth is a dinosaur that we'd like to stick. It's also a 5/5, so you can imagine extra turns with the Swordtooth down, Drovers down on the field, those mana dorks just suddenly turn into 3/3s for 2, which is pretty cool. Thematic Compass is a nice little bit of thinning for the deck. It's also a wonderful little land when it flips over. 2 mana for an artifact. It says pay 3 and tap, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. The beginning of your next end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform it into what is effectively Maze of Ith for the commander and legacy players out there. Spires of Araska or Maze of Ith. allows us to tap for 1 colourless mana, or we can tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So what the reason for this card, other than the first ability being quite good and conveniently synergizing with our deck, the forcing our opponent to tap 1 creature down means that they can't really play around Settle the Wreckage anymore. So we tap down 1 creature at a time, which is their way of playing around Settle the Wreckage. Eventually they get mad, they swing in with everything, and then we settle them. Settle the Wreckage is our removal spell of choice. We need it right early, which is why we're not going with Fumigate. Also, it rotates. We're not going with Cleansing Nova as well, because we do have Oath of Teferi and a lot of enchantments in the sideboard, so... Excuse me, Cleansing Nova doesn't really get that secondary ability available, so... We'd rather go with Settle the Wreckage in this particular case. Exiles all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search their library for that many basic land cards, put those onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle their library. So we do ramp our opponent up. That is the downside. It allows our opponent to get more live draws, but it removes creatures altogether. So Scrap Heap Scroungers from red-black, indestructible creatures like Ronus and Hazaret, they all die, which they wouldn't with Cleansing Nova or Fumigate, so that is the one upside for Settle the Wreckage. We don't really care that our opponent's going to be playing a ton of stuff, because we plan on just taking a load of turns and ulting our Teferis and things like that. This deck is a little degenerate when it gets to go off, but it is mostly just a fun deck, I would say. Oath of Teferi is the spicy meme card of the deck. It is the card that goes out all the time. It's the loose, I can't even remember the bloody name of it. It's the one that you take out for your sideboards all the time anyway, because it's memey. 3, a white and a blue for an legendary enchantment. When Oath of Teferi enters the battlefield, you exile another target permanent you control, then you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And then the actual reason to play it is that you may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn, rather than only once. So we get to uptick our Teferi twice, we get to uptick our Tachiova. If you remember my my Temporal Friends deck, that's kind of what I'm building this off of. Temporal Friends used Oath of Teferi as pretty much the win con with Teferi, because you get a really, really quick win off of him. So we want to get towards that -8. That's one of our win conditions. The other way is just beating down with either Nissa 5/5s, Swordtooth 5/5s, or anything of that sort. But what we want to be doing is ticking up Planeswalkers repeatedly, so that's the plan. It is a little bit memey, so if you don't like memey cards, maybe consider putting some Karns in place of this. Maybe just Fumigates if you don't care about rotation stuff. Fumigates are also pretty good in this slot, but I like a good meme, so we're keeping it. So, Teferi, we all know about Teferi. I'm not going to run across him too much. He's a 5 loyalty, horrible planeswalker. 4 loyalty, you can tick up to draw a card, and then you get to untap 2 lands. If you get to do that with Oath of Teferi twice, that effectively makes Teferi cost 1 mana, drawing 2 cards, holding up Settle the Wreckage, which is why I hate this card. But we're playing him today, because he's fun in this deck, for me. Tachiova, Benthic Druid, 3 a green and a blue for a 3/3. Does eat a lot of removal, but we're not too upset when that happens most of the time. It is a legendary creature, so it allows us to cast Karn's Temporal Sundering the following turn. But Tachiova says, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. So, nice little bit of life gain, nice bit of card draw. We just filter through our deck. It's one of the reasons why Tachiova's not too bad to get bolted away, because our opponent kills it. But they have to do that most of the time in response to a landfall trigger, which means that we've replaced that card. We might not have replaced it with a better card, but, you know, we get something in place of that Tachiova instead. Karn's Temporal Sundering, so we've spoke about this one. Takes an extra turn, allows us to bounce a creature. We could run Nexus of Fate, that is very much a possible card that you could run here, but I kind of like the 6 mana over the 7 mana. It's not difficult to cast as you might think. It is a legendary sorcery, which does mean that we need either a planeswalker or a legendary creature on the field, but we're running, what, 3, 7, 10 of our cards. That's 1/6 of our deck is legendary permanents that enable Karn's Temporal Sundering. So, you know, just go right ahead. That's pretty much the deck anyway, guys. The mana base is pretty simple as well. We are skewed heavily into forests, mostly because we have the early game mana dorks. They will open up our mana in the late game, so 5 forests, 2 islands, 2 plains. You always, when you make basic lands, there's a nice little rule of thumb. It's not always the case, but for the most part, if you're going to add basics in, they should equal the number of mana symbols in one of your hardest to cast spells. So in this case, we've got 2 islands to the 2 temporal sunderings. We got 2 plains to the 2 settler wreckages. So running 2, 2, and 5. We've also supplemented that with many, many, many dual lands. This is not a cheap deck by any stretch. Irrigated farmlands, 3 copies of this, and it's the battlefield tapped, but it is a plains and an island, which allows us to have Sunpetal Grove and Hinterland Harbour come into play untapped on turn 2, so that is one use of it. We also have Cycling 2, which means we can pay 2 to discard it to redraw a card, so it's almost like Tatiova's out on the field without her actually being there. Other than that, yep, Sunpetal Grove says enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or a plains, so if we got a basic or a farmland in play on turn 1, then these are turn 2 dual lands untapped. Botanical Sanctums, I wish I had more of these. I might actually go up the Botanical Sanctums over maybe the islands or the forests, skew that a little bit, because we are a base blue-green deck, I would say, which splashes white for 3 different cards, so that's something to keep in mind. The Botanical Sanctums in the early game, probably one of the things that's going to let me down with the mana is not being able to get the turn 1 Llanowar Elf down, so you maybe want the Botanical Sanctums up a little bit more if you have them. I'm supplementing them with Hinterland Harbours, however, which are roughly the same thing. However, they're always going to be tap lands on turn 1, which is the downside, which means we can't get Llanowar Elves down on turn 1. But it ends the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or an island. So, you know, whatever. Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds allows us to get double land drops. So we get to play a land, we get to crack the land, search a library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield. Double triggers for Tachiova. So we get to draw 2 and gain 2 off an Evolving Wilds, which makes it very good. It's also thinning as well, because eventually when we're at about 5 or 6 mana, we want to be hitting a land drop or 2 a turn, depending on whether or not we've got the Wayward Swordtooth, but we don't want to be overdoing it, so thinning out our deck just means that we're actually just going to draw into pure gas after a while. 1 copy of Field of Ruin as well to hit those pesky Azcanters, any other pesky lands that we might have to worry about as well. Field of Ruin can catch. Hopefully the colourless land won't screw us too much, but we do have a metric ton of dual lands here, so shouldn't be too much of a problem. Onto the sideboard. So one problem we might face in the particular matchups is aggro, so we've run Authority of the Consuls for that one. This is one card that will rotate out after the 5 weeks, so something to bear in mind. You could run another Seal Away or something like that if you don't have the authorities, but they say creatures the opponent controls enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, I gain 1 life. So it reduces the amount of damage that that creature deals, so it's superb against aggro strategies that are like token focused and things like that, because it's just going to pretty much fog their first turn. But other than that, you know, it's just going to tap down, buy us loads of time. If we're running Seal Aways in the same board as well, the tap creature gets us an immediate Seal Away target as well. 1 and a white for a flash, which means we can cast it whenever we want. Seal Away enters the battlefield tap. When Seal Away enters the battlefield, exile target tapped creature an opponent controls until Seal Away leaves the battlefield. So we can avoid maybe an attack trigger by comboing consoles with Seal Away. Silent Gravestones to hit Graveyard Hate. 1 mana, cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. Does not stop in Balm or Aftermath, but it does stop things like Scarab God, Liliana, anything that targets the graveyard, Torrential Gearhulk. Those are the 3 big baddies that you bring in Silent Gravestone over, so something to be aware there. 4 copies of Negate as well, because I don't like control, so we have to out-control the control players. Negate is 1 and a blue to counter target non-creature spell, so if our opponent plays their Cast Outs or their, I don't know, Urza's Ruinous Blast, which wouldn't do very much, we can counter that. We can counter our opponent's counters in response to them countering our stuff, that kind of deal. Cast Outs, 3 and a green for an enchantment with flash, so same as Seal Away, we can cast it whenever we feel like in response to things. When Cast Out enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. And we also have a cycle, which means we can discard it if we don't need it, to redraw a card. So we're kind of in that card draw engine sphere of things with Cast Out as well. This is here for Planeswalkers and anything else really as a catch-all. Nissa Vital Force is good against control as well. Allows us to go grab any permanents back from our graveyards, which is usually like Planeswalkers. We can also go the aggro route as well with the +1. She gets to untap a land, make 5/5s. If we have Oath of Teferi out, that's 10 power on the board. That's almost as though we were ultimating a Nissa every single turn without the flying. Her -6 as well allows us to have some extra land benefit as well, which is always great. I do worry about milling myself with this deck. It might need a copy of Commit to Memory just in case, because we do draw a metric ton of cards in this deck, so I am a little worried about milling myself, so you might not want to go with that -6, but you never know. She's an alternative win condition anyway, if all goes horribly wrong. So that's going to be the deck anyway, guys. Be sure to check out the links down below in the description. That'll take you to the deck tech and the link to the first game as well. There'll be a link at the end of this video that takes you to the next game as well if you stick around for the end card. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Be sure to like, subscribe. If you hit that little bell icon, you'll get notifications when future videos go live, because YouTube won't tell you. You got to do it yourself. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.